is a distance in the light, vibrations of a thundercloud. There is a distance in the light, frozen bed of snow-capped heights. There is a distance in the light, vibrations of a thundercloud.
Hello, loved ones. This is Matt Stevens, and this is the My Sober Addiction podcast. And we are happy, healthy, wealthy, and free. Yes, loved ones, we are happy, healthy, wealthy, and free. And for this episode, this 49th episode of My Sober Addiction, which kind of blows me away a little bit that we have gotten to this point. I'm like, wow, maybe I need to start taking this thing seriously, huh? or not. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll talk about that later. I've got some plans coming up now that it seems as if this thing is a thing. So there's that. For this episode, I narrowed things down to a word. I'm like, what word do I want to really place some emphasis on? And the first word that came to mind was gratitude. I'm like, well, gratitude, yeah, that's always important. Gratitude is great, especially for people in our situation, people in recovery, or the loved ones of people who are in recovery. But then I think, well, no, that's not true. That's just your addictive mind thinking in those ways. Because gratitude is something that is of the utmost importance for anybody in any stage. We need to always be in a constant state of gratitude for the blessings and just the great things that go on in our life. Even really for the bad things that have happened in our life, because there's a really good chance we've learned some very valuable lessons from that. And because of that, it's put us in a better place today. So when you think back on some of the negative things that have happened in your life, yeah, I know sometimes it's a little hard to be grateful for that. But think about where you are right now. And would you be there without that? I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm just asking a question here. I mean, it's possible. But I do believe that the position we're in now is directly related to where we've come from. But anyway, I've already done a couple of episodes recently on gratitude. And while I'm not poo-pooing the whole idea, I mean, if every episode was about that, that would be a pretty good run. It really would. However, another word that came to mind was pride. And I'm like, ooh, pride. Now there's an issue. There's an issue a lot of people have, because pride is it's a funny thing in that with pride, it's a tightrope walk, really, or we're kind of straddling a line. On one side, having some pride in your recovery, for example, or anything, is a good thing. Being proud of your accomplishments, proud of your achievements, being just proud of how far you've come. Be it addiction or anything. It doesn't have to be addiction. But then there's the other side of it. And the other side of it is being prideful. I guess it's the difference between being proud and being prideful. We usually understand the difference between the two. Being prideful can often translate to boastful. And it's amazing some of the things that we get prideful about. Some people will be prideful over how bad of a day they've had or whatever. For example, here's what I mean. You may hear someone say, oh my God, wow, what a day. It has been crazy. Just, and then they'll rattle off a list of all the crazy things that have happened that day. Okay. And then you may have another person pop in and say, well, yeah, well, that's nothing because blah, 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 this and that. No, it's like, okay. Okay, fine. You win the contest. Your day was more crappy than mine. That's cool. You can have that. I will gladly hand that over to you. So pride, yeah, that's a great issue. That's a great thing to talk about. But ultimately, I landed on complacency. Complacency is something that impacts all of our lives in and out of addiction and recovery, whether you've ever been in addiction and or recovery. That's something that lands in everybody's life. And complacency it's a sneaky little booger. That's the nicest way I could think to put it. Because complacency is one of those things that kind of sets in, and you really don't even realize it has set in. But how does it set in? And I am going to relate this to addiction and sobriety or sober living or recovery or however you want to word these things. Because complacency can be very dangerous, especially in personal relationships, romantic relationships. People get complacent. They call it being comfortable, right? Oh, I'm just so comfortable with my partner. Well, are you comfortable? Because that is a good thing. Or are you complacent, where you have just kind of let it go and you're just really not working on the relationship anymore? You just accept it as it is. Those things happen. But that's kind of outside of recovery. As it pertains to recovery, it's kind of the same thing. We've grown used to sober living. We've grown used to just, this is life now. And while that's good, I mean, it's a good thing to make that your norm. It's a good thing to have recovery and just living sober in general as what is your norm now. However, we've got to remember, addiction never disappears. We do tune it out, tune it in, tune it out, tune it in. We tune that out, and then we tune in sober living. The biggest issue with complacency is that us addicts in recovery, we've got to remember is that we most likely are pre-wired to addiction. And I realize that some people came to find addiction in other ways. Maybe it was prescription medicines and, whatever. But most of us, if you really trace it back, you could see that you were pre-wired for it. Maybe it didn't show up. For example, back in the 90s, because I was a late bloomer, I didn't find addiction to opioids until I was 32. So yeah, I was a late bloomer. Now, I'm not saying I never did anything. I did some stuff back in the early 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, all that. But I could have looked back and seen it. In fact, I kind of did. Back in the 90s, I was hanging out with some friends, whatever, and this is when PlayStation 1 was still a thing. This is before PlayStation 2. We were playing PlayStation games, really got into it. And looking back on it, I was addicted. I was addicted to RPGs, role-playing games, like Final Fantasy VII. That was a really cool game, and I'll maintain to today, and that's why it's such a classic. However, in my wilder days, I suppose, I had a lot of people in and out of my house. Long story short, my PlayStation 1 got stolen. And I'll tell you, it was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Because once it was gone, I realized, man, I probably don't need to do that. I probably don't need to go down that road of video games. Because I was addicted to it. I didn't buy another one. When my kids were young, we got a Wii, a Nintendo Wii when those came out. But then when I did get sober, I did find myself in a mobile app game. And I will maintain to this day that it very possibly saved my life. Meaning, it gave me something to direct my addiction towards besides drugs. Because I was newly sober, I had no friends because everybody I knew was in addiction. Couldn't hang out with them. It gave me something to direct my focus towards. And I played that game and eventually I gave it up. So I can look back to before my chemical addiction and realize, yeah, I have addictive tendencies. I have addictive traits, and most of us do. And another example I have given in the past was like I had a friend, dear friend of mine, who could on a Friday night decide, hey, Matt, let's get some dope this weekend and blah, 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 whatever. We'll get high and have fun. Okay. Now, we might do that Friday night, even all the way Saturday, but Sunday he would be like, all right, that's it. I'm done. I'm good. that was fun. We'll maybe do it again in a month or two or whatever. To which I was like, huh? He's like, yeah. I got to clean up. I got to get ready. Tomorrow, work starts on Monday, the work week. Like, well, I mean, I get it. You do got to get up and go to work, or whatever. And I understand that, but I can't for the life of me understand how somebody could get up and do those things without dope. It's like, yeah, I can get up and go do things, but first I got to have some dope. That's just kind of how it was. But some people just aren't wired that way. They just don't get addicted. I'm not saying they can't physically become addicted. Yeah, they can. But a lot of us were mentally addicted long before we were physically addicted. I kind of got to think that it's like we were mentally addicted and then we were kind of searching for something to latch onto. And then the physical addiction happened. But then you got those other guys who are not necessarily pre-wired to be addicted. And yeah, they can get physically addicted. They can become physically dependent on a substance. But they're not necessarily wired that way, right? Getting back to complacency. When we get used to sober life, it becomes part of our day. And while that's awesome, we should do that, it's not good to get bored and just be static in it. Because as I said, for those of us who are classic addicts, addiction never disappears. We just tune it out. When we get static in our sobriety, we get static in our recovery, we can almost forget that any of that ever happened. We can almost forget that we are in recovery. It gets a little too comfortable, just like the relationship. You can almost forget that this is a relationship. And no, I do not like to refer to addiction as a spirit, an evil spirit or whatever. I don't refer to it that way. However, I do know that the addictive side of your mind has a mind of its own. And it will, if given the chance, find a way back in. So when people get complacent in their recovery, and that is their norm, but then it gets dangerous and they start thinking, well, this is just how it is. I am just sober. No, you're in recovery. Living a sober lifestyle, yes, but you are in recovery. Let's not forget that. Let's not get complacent about that. Because we do not want to let our guard down. We don't want that addictive side of ourselves, that spirit of addiction, if you want to put it that way, to see a crack in the armor, to see a little glimmer of light coming through the door, to think, oh, wait a minute. Can we possibly reel this one back in here? Hold on, let's see what we can do. Let's throw a little temptation out there. Like I said before, I've had people ask me, I had one particular person ask me about a friend. They had a friend who had been clean and sober for 14 years, I think it was. And this person relapsed and was back on, I think it was pain pills. And I was asked, how does that happen? After 14 years, how do you do that? I mean, you are in the clear. I'm like, well, they're beyond in the clear. They're pretty much at a point where it's like a reset. It's like they're at a reset. However, that brain, that 3D brain of yours, it's in between your ears. I'm not talking about your mind. I'm talking about your brain. That 3D brain of yours is, in most cases, in my case, and in a lot of cases, is pre-wired to be addicted. And it can fall into many forms of addiction. It does not have to be drugs. It blows my mind when I research things to do with addiction, how many times I see things about gambling or porn addictions. I'm like, I don't see how people can get that into either one of those things. I just don't. But then when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I do. Because it's a matter of gratification. It's a matter of getting that reward. That's all anybody's ever chasing with addiction anyway, is that dopamine hit, right? They're chasing that gratification, that instant gratification, that reward that we get from achieving, well, in my case, it was getting dope. Here's a great way of putting it. And I think Nikki Sixx talked about it in the Heroin Diaries, or it may have been in the book after, which was called This Is Gonna Hurt, which was a great book, by the way. If you have not read This Is Gonna Hurt, I recommend it. You probably should read the Heroin Diaries first, just for context, but I don't think it's completely necessary. And really, This Is Gonna Hurt is a better, I don't say it's a better book, but I enjoyed it more. Let's put it that way. But anyway, he talked about, and I'm like, wow, is he right there? You see, most people who don't understand, for example, heroin addiction, they would think, okay, you'd be like, okay, what is the number one most best, favorite, whatever you want to call it, moment in the whole process of the chase to the getting high part? Like most people are like, well, it's got to be when you get high, when that feeling hits you. It's like, yeah, that's what most people would think, but it's not. And then some people think, okay, well, I guess since it is about the chase in a lot of cases, I guess when you finally find some, like if you're having a hard time, or when you finally hook up with your dope man and you get your stuff. And while that's a good guess, that's not it either. Most heroin addicts can tell you that moment when it's like, oh yeah, this is it, is when you are about to push off on your plunger. That moment that blood jumps up into that needle, that's when you're like, whoa, yeah, here we go. And you haven't even put the drugs into your system yet. But most people don't realize that's the point that most people are looking for. It's not the high. It's that gratification. It's that, whoo, there it is. And here we go. It's the gratification. So that's why things like other addictions, such as gambling, I can get it. I can see why they may be searching for that perfect bet. I'm kind of trying to imagine it. But they're searching for that perfect bet. And these betting apps are really playing into it hard, because they say that they'll let you bet on anything from, well, this particular player get more or less than 10 points or whatever. Or, well, this particular player score 10 points in the first half or not. Or will this particular player score more points in the first half or the second half? I mean, it can get really, really specific. And that I can see being something that somebody with a gambling addiction would be looking for. I can see somebody with a gambling addiction look at something like that and say, oh yeah, there it is. That's the one. And then they pull the trigger on making the bet. Yeah, I can see that being the moment. Now, most people will be like, heck no, dude. It's probably about when the bet hits and they're like, yeah, I won. Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. That's definitely a big moment. And that's definitely the feeling that we're talking about. But I also got to believe that the chase, the hunt for that perfect bet, for that one that really kind of turns your crank, I got to believe that's part of it as well. I don't know. I've never had gambling addiction, and I don't have the nerve to develop one. I have never been a betting man. Nope. I'll keep my money in my pocket. I mean, besides buying an occasional lottery ticket here and there, but I don't even do that anymore. But anyway, everybody experiences complacency in life, and addicts need to be aware, because addiction will sneak in the back door. It will look for a way back in. And I realize I am talking about addiction in a way that sounds like it is a entity in its own. And maybe it is. Maybe it is. Because a lot of people, especially Christians, will tell us that there's a spirit of addiction. They'll make it sound like it's a demon or something like that. And I'm like, okay, well, metaphorically, I can go with you on that, but I'm not so sure I can go with that's what it is. However, I can't argue with it either. It's just not how I personally look at it. Now, if you do, I get it. I do. I'm not poo-pooing anybody's party. So complacency is a big deal. Complacency in relationships, or we get complacency in our jobs, or we get complacency in our homes with housekeeping, or we get complacency with car maintenance. The possibilities abound. You've had your car for a few years and you've gotten to know it. Maybe start letting those oil changes go because it's like, I've let it go over 500 miles over the limit anyway. I've ran it over 1,000 miles over the limit anyway before. We can do that, right? We can do that. We can let it go. Or with housekeeping, it starts with, I don't feel like making my bed today. And it ends with dishes piled up to the ceiling or whatever. You get my point. When we stop practicing gratitude and realizing how awesome this is, whether it's your house, whether it's your car, your job, or your sobriety. When we stop giving gratitude for those things and we just settle into it and become static, that's when complacency sets in. And that's when we start letting things go. It's okay. I'll do the dishes sometime. It's okay, whatever. So I'm not as passionate about my job as I used to be. It's just a job, right? Yeah, well, back when you were in active addiction, you would have loved just to have had the ability to go to work. Never mind having a job, just to be able to get out of bed, groggy or not, and just get your clothes on, maybe grab a cup of coffee or whatever, and get out the door and go to work. Because back during those days, it was a lot more complicated than that. You couldn't just jump out of bed, put on your clothes, grab a cup of coffee, and go to work. No, you had to have your dope, right? And that's assuming you had some, that you had saved some back. But then most people in that situation don't have time to go to work because they've got to get on the chase. Anyway, that's getting off the subject. So complacency can be avoided. It usually starts with a very strong gratitude practice. And when I use the word strong, I don't mean a strong gratitude practice. It doesn't have to be some big, elaborate thing. We can be grateful for many, many small things. I am grateful for this desk sitting in front of me. I really am. Do I need it? Well, no, I guess I can make do without it, but I'm so grateful for it. I'm so grateful for the people in my life. See, that's some of the bigger, more elaborate things. It sounds, yeah, definitely be grateful for that. But how about being grateful for the fact that you woke up this morning and you weren't dope sick? Mentioned that one not too long ago. That's a good one. How about being grateful for the fact that you do have a car, you can get to work. Oh, by the way, you got a job, your bills are paid. It's really cool to see somebody when they're new to recovery and they do get a job and they get that paycheck. And it's like, wow, I got money and I don't have to go blow it all on dope. I can go to the grocery store, and they do. And they go drop like $100 at the grocery store and they're just stoked. Isn't that cool to watch those people? I think it is. It's so fun to watch them finally really just kind of hit their stride. And that's something that most people take for granted. Most people loathe going to the grocery store. They didn't want to go to the grocery store. They don't want to drop $100. They don't want to go to work. They don't want to do any of that stuff. When we realize where we've came from and we realize I can't let complacency set in. I mean, that's not something we sit around and ponder. We don't sit around and think, okay, I got to combat complacency. No, we don't do that. I mean, if you do, you're probably a robot. But complacency can be avoided with a good gratitude practice. Also, keep things fresh. Break pattern, spontaneity. It's like, well, how can I keep things fresh with regards to my recovery? And it's like, what are you suggesting there, Matt? How can you keep it fresh with recovery? I mean, recovery is supposed to get old, right? No, it's supposed to age, but not get old. That's where the gratitude comes in. I'm grateful for sobriety. I'm grateful for recovery. I'm grateful that I've hit the 10-year mark, or 10 days for that matter. But yes, the big issue with complacency, for addicts particularly, is that we are pre-wired to addiction. That's a big issue. because we are pre-wired to become addicted to things. Is it okay if we become addicted to things that are healthy? For example, if I'm addicted to podcasting or writing, I don't even know if I want to call that addiction or if I would rather call that therapy. Call it whatever you want. But from my perspective, it's best to remain vigilant and don't fall into recovery burnout, as I talked about in my last episode, episode 48, titled very simply, Recovery Burnout is Real. And it is real. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, what would come first, recovery burnout or recovery complacency? I don't think they're the same thing. However, because burnout is a whole other thing. And I'm not saying they can't go together, but I am saying they can also happen independently of each other. So there's that. Anyway, loved ones, I do have some plans coming up for the audio podcast. Now that I am right here at the episode 50 mark, this one being 49, the next one in a couple of weeks will be 50. And after that, we are off to the races for, I guess, second half of the first century, or whatever you want to call it. But I have some things coming up that I think are going to be good. I'm excited about it. There are going to be some changes to the format, I think. I'm starting to go a little longer, and I do want to stretch it out. Yes, I've often mentioned how I am not opposed to having guests on. That is something that I have wanted to do. But I've also pursued other things, such as the YouTube channel, such as the blogging on Substack and or Reddit. Therefore, the audio podcast has always, and I still love it, I've still got a passion for this, but it's always just kind of remained as this little pep talk, just a solo pep talk from me to you. It is a labor of love. It always has been. As I've said before, I love addicts. I do. I don't mean that in a way that some people are like, oh yeah, I love addicts too. Yeah, man, we're supposed to love everybody. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure how to put it into words. I just do. That's all I know. It's a labor of love, just me here for you. Anyway, loved ones, please find me on X, formerly Twitter, as Matt Stevens, MSA, as in My Sober Addiction. Also on YouTube, also Matt Stevens, MSA, as in My Sober Addiction. Please follow me on X and subscribe on YouTube. And while you're at it, give me a rating and review wherever you get your audio podcasts. That would be very much appreciated. So, loved ones, got some great things coming up for the podcast. Yes, it's going to be a little bit different, but it's going to be good. So, there's that. That's what I got. I love you, and I will be back directly.
There is a distance in the light.